Watcher, it's your boy, Old Slacky, Fights Gone By podcast, coming at you on Thursday the 15th of October. And we've got a double bill today because we're talking about the fights that happened last weekend, because I've been slow off the mark on that. And then we're talking about the fights happening this weekend, because they look pretty good. I think before we get into anything, I have to say, Buckley's knockout, yeah, I appreciated that. People being like, I can't wait to hear what you thought of that. I mean, what else is there to think? Damn, that's awesome. Not an awful lot happened like that knockout, up to the knockout. Yeah, you probably won't see one like that again. At least anytime soon. Kind of weird, because that's what Buckley's going to be known for now. I mean, he seems like quite a middle-of-the-pack kind of guy. He looked very, very limited against Kevin Holland. But now he's got that on his record. They can just show that any time that he's going to fight. Truly incredible knockout. You know, throws a left kick, gets caught. He doesn't get caught, sorry, gets caught on the forearm, and the guy begins parrying it across his body, and then he jumps into the kick, which is incredible because the guy was pulling him around by his foot at the time. I could imagine doing it the two-touch style, where you throw your leg like a side kick or something and then jump into it, like Raymond Daniels does that. But to do that while someone's trying to move your balance around at the same time, astonishing. And I got lots of people saying to me, Jack, is this what you meant when you said you got to keep striking on one leg, or you got to keep working on one leg? No, that's not what I meant, but it's pretty dope nonetheless. Yeah, and what do you do with that? What is the correct response to the guy jumping into a back kick straight at your face up the middle? It is a nice, on a principle level, I think that's pretty sound, because, you know, typically when you see a back kick land to the head, think, regional champion Gegard Mousasi. He got knocked out by one by middleweight also ran Uriah Hall, and main eventer in a couple of weeks, Uriah Hall. But that was him ducking into it, thinking that a wheel kick was coming, or a jab or something like that, just ducking down into it. Eddie Wineland against Renan Barão thought a jab was coming, ducked down into the back kick to the head. There's been a few of them, but it's always the guy ducking down and basically putting his head in front of his chest. If you wanted to catch a guy with a straight back kick in the face, I suppose you'd want him to be upright, and dudes stay upright when they've caught a leg. I'm not saying that you'll probably ever see that again. I'm just saying that I suppose it makes sense the guy's head was there for it. But yes, truly incredible. Lit the internet up, and it turns out that it was like frame for frame a Tekken move. I haven't played Tekken since probably like Tekken 2. So, and I keep seeing people talking about it, like Tekken and MK, people are always talking about, and I just haven't picked them up in years. So I'll have to give that a look. But again, it's one of those things where, I think I've said this before, but like COD, or when I revisited Street Fighter, was that Street Fighter 5 they put on PlayStation Plus? I revisited it and I was like, this is just full of people who've been doing this for 10, 15 years, and I'm never going to catch up. But then I suppose that's how a lot of people think about doing jiu-jitsu or striking or anything like that. So maybe I'm just being a bitch. Yes, so Buckley, banging knockout, deserved knockout of the night, deserved knockout of the year. Honestly, before this, was it the same night? Mamed Khalidov knocked out Scott Askham with a jumping switch kick to the head, and everyone went, oh, knockout of the year contender. Then Buckley just performed the knockout of the century. And then later in the night, Cory Sandhagen, I wrote this in my article, I said, on any other night, that should have been a knockout of the year candidate, wheel kicking Marlon Moraes in the head. But, it just sort of flies under the radar because of it. Sorry, I got a well-sore throat, from probably drinking too much, but maybe the Rona, who knows. But let's move on. Let's segue seamlessly into Cory Sandhagen. People get mad at me for calling him Haagen-Dazs. Sandhagen versus Marlon Moraes. And this one, fuck me for doubting him last episode. But, absolutely beautiful work. I mentioned it in my pre-fight podcast, and I keep calling back to something that I started writing, but I didn't finish and didn't publish. So, it's not actually something you will have read, but I made, comparisons between, Moraes and Aldo, in that when you put pressure on them, they tend to try and punch their way out of it. You know, think like, when Robbie Lawler broke Matt Brown's pressure by immediately counterpunching him as hard as he could. It's a good way to get people to back up. You know, it was kind of like, it is a very common response to being pressured, because if you don't have the footwork and the direction changes and stuff to relieve the pressure, get back out into space and use the space again, your main reaction is like, well, if I hit him really hard, he'll let up. Moraes tried to do it a lot. There's loads of dudes out there who do it, but Marlon Moraes is one. And you noticed it against Henry Cejudo and Jose Aldo. Once they started putting pressure on him, he just swung as hard as he could to get them to back up. And, Aldo didn't, Henry Cejudo didn't, and it really started to go tits up for him. And certainly against Aldo actually both, Cejudo and Aldo, he started to sort of run around the ring, cage, whatever. Very similar to his teammate, Edson Barbosa. When he doesn't like the pressure, he just sort of starts jogging around the ring. And it's not even like if the pressure's inscrutable. If he just doesn't like that the guy's coming forward and hitting him, like Beneil Dariush was picking him apart with jabs a lot for the most part. Every time Dariush stepped in with a jab, Edson Barbosa would just jog off around the ring, do half a lap, and Marlon Moraes can get into that habit. But what Cory did in this one was what he does to everyone. He hopped in, booped the guy on the end of the nose, or didn't even reach his nose, but showed him the jab, and then immediately rebounded out. And Marlon Moraes would swing and miss, and then, what happens is you either go, well, I'm going to keep swinging every time he steps in, and Ricky Hatton's coach said to him, I think it was in the, what was his name? Castillo? Can't remember. One of his harder fights. He's going into like the 7th or 8th round, and he's not really finding any success. And his coach says, "Keep swinging, Ricky. Maybe the breeze will give him hypothermia." But then he does eventually knock him out just by grinding him down. But yeah, you have that option. You can be like, "I'm going to keep swinging as hard as I can. Maybe I'll catch him at some point." But most people, one, don't like to be made to look silly. Especially if you've got a reputation as a crisp striker, you feel silly, and it makes you think about like the scorecards and things. I'm being made to miss. It makes me look really bad. The other one is that dudes will not be keen to tire themselves out, because hitting the pads and missing the pads, like if you get a pad man who's just pulling things away from you, like the really good Thai pad man will just piss you off like that. And that's how like good Thai pad work is basically a substitute for sparring in a lot of top Thai gyms. Yeah, missing is shit, and people don't like to do it, especially if they've got like a perfectionist streak in them. So he'd hop in, boop, pull back, and he'd either like let him fall short, or if he was too close, he'd stick out the arm as a leverage guard, over Moraes' shoulder to jam the shot, or he'd have his shoulder up. Really good at just avoiding the counter blows. I mean, he got caught with some counter blows, but he just took them. He was like, yeah, fine, whatevs. But what you saw was it settled Moraes down. The counter punches became less committed. There was one where he threw himself onto his hands and knees, missing a counter left hook. But then he started to stand there more, and it meant that Cory could time his counter shots. There was a really nice counter uppercut in round one. And also that Cory could get his lead leg. If you're not moving around as quickly, if you're not springing in and out, if you're waiting on your shots, if your fingers come off the trigger a bit, it's a lot easier to get to that lead leg. And actually, there was a couple of instances of what Rose Namajunas did against Joanna Jędrzejczyk in their first fight. She shoulder faked the jab, or did a little step and level change to fake stepping in, and then pulled back, and Jędrzejczyk threw a low kick that completely threw her out of position, and then Rose would move back in as if to attack. And the same thing was happening to Moraes here. He was missing low kicks because he thought he was going to time Cory stepping in, and he couldn't. Just death by 1,000 feints, really. We keep saying it, but feints are the game breaker in MMA with these guys who are learning to counter-strike well, or are capable of counter-striking well. And you saw, like, the more Moraes was being made to bite on things, the more he didn't, like, if he was holding his punches back, he didn't want to stand around and eat punches, for nothing, because Cory was getting in and out too easily. So he started backing off and giving ground, like we were talking about. And that's when Sandhagen could, like, double jab and body kick, or he'd throw like a jab with his right hand. So, from orthodox, he'd just sort of poke it out there, and then poke it out there again as he stepped into southpaw, and then he'd throw the body kick on the open side. So those were the telling strike of the fight for me. Like, watching those go in, I was going, yeah, that's what's going to get him in the long run. The wheel kick just sort of came out of nowhere and surprised him. But between that and the back kick to the body he attempted earlier, you had Moraes reaching down for it. Yeah, I mean, that was sort of one of those endings where you're like, oh, happy coincidence, because it felt like Sandhagen was really getting the measure of him and taking control of the fight. And it could have done that for more rounds. Extremely impressive though, because like I was saying, like, I don't know if he has the power to make Moraes respect him, but clearly he was hitting him hard, but like it wasn't necessary. The power wasn't necessary. All that was necessary was to get Moraes swinging at air and then convince him that he didn't want to swing at air and then start stepping in with his own strikes. So I thought that was an absolutely cracking performance from Cory Sandhagen. You couldn't ask for better against a very, very tricky, respected, dangerous opponent. And I suppose that's why it's worth stepping back in against an absolute monster. Moraes is, in many people's estimation, better than Sterling. You go off the crushing loss to Sterling, and you're like, yeah, I'll fight Marlon Moraes next. But again, like I said last time, you're taking big risks every time you fight in this division, and there's almost no reward. Even if you win against the monster, you're still one of 8 guys in contention. But then that's those lower weight classes anyway. And then the other thing I wrote about was Edson Barbosa versus Makwan Amirkhani, which was much better than I thought it had any right to be honest. I was like, it's the striker with terrible fight IQ against the grappler who can only go for one round, but it turned out much nicer than that. There were some questionable decisions, like the fact that Amirkhani backed up immediately and gave Edson Barbosa the centre of the cage, where, his issue is backing up. So if you engage him at least in the middle of the cage, you know that you can chase him out of the exchange towards the fence. You're letting him have the maximum amount of room to retreat over. But it was quite interesting. Yeah, it looked like Amirkhani was waiting for the round kick to try and catch it. But Edson's best weapon is his left round kick to the body, his switch kick. And that's not a thing so much against southpaws. Unless, you do what Jan Blachowicz did and you catch them circling off with their elbow out in the air. But it's not as much of a weapon, obviously. Especially if you don't want it getting caught. Don't go into the closed side and kick the opponent in the back where they can take it and just take you down off it. But by kick, but instead of throwing round kicks with his right leg into the open side, Barbosa was actually throwing the front kick, which was working a lot better. He wasn't really getting, Amirkhani would reach for it and he'd limp leg it out or kick it over the top and take it away. So that was good. And he was getting to the body with right hooks. If you saw, every time Amirkhani closed, he'd always hit the right hook to the body on the way out. Barbosa would, that is. So he was getting his body work in spite of not being keen to throw that right round kick, because it seemed very clear that Amirkhani was waiting on it. I thought it was quite interesting that Amirkhani was trying to get him to engage in the hand fight, and Barbosa was basically refusing to play the game. He kept pulling his lead hand back tight to himself whenever Amirkhani was reaching for it. And that gave Amirkhani the jab a little bit more, and it also meant that Amirkhani could drop his lead hand low and come up with the up jab. And the up jab / corkscrew uppercut, depending on... I think that's a power thing, like jab and jolt. That's how I'd differentiate them. But obviously very cool southpaw setup. Lifts the opponent's head up and you follow with the left straight. A lot of guys slide down the side when they do it. So you slide down the outside of the lead leg. That's a nice way. You sort of hop as you're doing it. It's a nice way to go down that angle. But for Amirkhani's purposes, he didn't need to. He was stepping up the inside of the lead leg because he was trying to engage in clinches. And it worked really well. We talk a lot about how the uppercut plays into this sort of stuff. Because if you throw an uppercut at someone, they, even subconsciously, they will stand a bit taller, or stand a bit more upright, because the uppercut is really only there as a counter to their head forward posture. You get the odd weird one, like BJ Penn uppercutting from right behind him against GSP in their first fight, and GSP's beautiful upright stance, so he doesn't get clipped on the chin or on the front of the face or anything, but he just manages to catch his nose and tear it upwards. But that means that the uppercut is really nice as a way to get to the body. So if you watch someone like Nicky Holzken, he'll throw the right uppercut followed immediately by the left hook to the body. Rico Verhoeven does that too sometimes. He'll go right uppercut, palm down left hook to the body with a right push kick / oblique kick to the body, whatever. It's just a nice way to stand the guy up. It works in the same way with the classic right uppercut, left hook, right straight combination that, it's really easy to learn, and it's just a nice one you can fire off quickly because you've got 3 different punches, but it's quite a natural movement to learn. Very easy combination. You learn it really early on. But obviously the targets are all up top because you're using the right uppercut to stand the guy up, and then the left hook to maybe slap him out of the way, or at least get him covering up, and then the right straight, because the right uppercut is going to be a closer in punch. You're hoping he's moving out of range. You catch him on the end of the right straight. I mean, the right uppercut to right straight and the right straight to right uppercut are both little combinations that work off the reaction to the previous punch. Andrei Arlovsky used to be really good at the right uppercut to right straight and the right straight to the right uppercut. And then now he's just not good at anything. But the relationship between wrestling and the uppercut is really interesting too, because obviously you've got people like Chad Mendes who will level change or slap the inside thigh with their hand, and you throw your hips back and drop your head out in front of you because you can't sprawl upright. Doesn't work. Then you're just like planking but standing in place. You know, to sprawl you've got to get your hips back behind your head. But that is when the uppercut becomes a viable attack. Head forward of hips. So Mendes would fake the level change and come up with the uppercut. You got the opposite here with Amirkhani. He comes up with the up jab through the middle and takes the underhook to get the clinch, or drops on the leg to get a single leg. And those both worked flawlessly, those entries. It was the fact that Barbosa could fight himself out of those bad positions comfortably that let him down. Actually, another one that I've talked about recently is Austin Hubbard, because he fights so many great grapplers. He does up jab with his lead hand and then tries to head kick you while you're standing up, because he knows that that's the moment when you won't be level changing. If he leads with the up jab coming in, he'll try and kick your head off, and then he'll start dealing with takedown attempts as you come back at him. Up jabs, they're dope. And then of course there was the Barbosa shift, which was gorgeous. And I think this is something that's quite interesting to visit. I mean, like I said, I wrote a big article about this at the Fight Primer. If you're a Patreon boy, go read that. I say read, I also included the narration track, so you could just listen to it, look at the pictures. But I was just laying out on the diagrams, like, where Edson Barbosa's weight is. If you notice, like, the shift itself isn't particularly special. Like, if you shift normally, you're normally shifting to cover distance, as in move yourself across the ring, or to get onto a new stance. But Edson Barbosa's shift was just to get that extra bit of reach. If you watch him, he coils his leg behind him, so he'll bring his right knee down towards the mat and get on the ball of his back foot and pull it in a little bit, and then he'll drive as hard as he can off that back foot, throw his shoulders well forward, so that his head's forward of his hips, which is bad generally, and his hips are over his lead leg. So nothing like a stance. He's just on top of one leg, throwing the right straight, and he gets about 6 inches of extra reach on it. And that's why he dropped, he threw it like 10 times, landed it almost every time, dropped Amirkhani 3 times. And it was working because Amirkhani thought he was too far away. He was like, he can't reach me. Oh, bang. Even if they can reach you, you've normally got a little bit of distance to pull your head back, take some stink off it. But he's going right through his head because he's so much further forward than he should be at that point. And then the shift itself, the stepping, only really there to catch him. And I talked about in that article, like, days in traditional martial arts drilling stepping punches, because it's such a useless movement normally, stepping forward and punching with the same hand and leg. Because it's really not natural. It's not a good balance thing. And, if you do like karate or taekwondo or anything like that, they're obsessed with getting the hand and the foot to land at the same time. And you're just like, there's no point in doing that. Whereas this application of this stepping punch, I really like, where you throw yourself forward so that you need to catch yourself. And is it good boxing? No. But it is for a longer distance, as you will find in the Southpaw versus Orthodox stance matchups in kickboxing and MMA especially. You're getting 6 inches of extra reach. I think that it's a move that a lot of people could use very successfully. And Barbosa did a couple of interesting things with it. Like, he was circling to his left past Amirkhani's lead foot, and he, dragged his right foot across behind him like he was doing a jinga, and then shot forward into it. It's a really cool little move. Go read the article. I'm not going to dwell on it too much here, but yeah, you saw it. It was very cool. Other stuff from that card, Tom Aspinall knocked out some French dude who just basically got on the bottom and gave up, and he really wasn't very impressed with himself, Tom Aspinall. But Dricus du Plessis fought Marcus Perez. I said look out for Dricus du Plessis because he had 2 great fights with Roberto Soldic back in the day. Well, not even back in the day, like 2 years ago. And this one, he didn't look great for the start of it. Perez was putting pressure on him and trying to back him up, and then he managed to clip Perez, and Perez tried to do the Yair Rodriguez overhead elbow, and got hit in the back of the head basically while doing it. And it reminded me so much of when Dong Hyun Kim decided, because he knocked out was it Eric Silva with a spinning back fist. He was like, oh, well, that's all I need now. And then he fought Tyron Woodley and just threw spinning back fist after spinning back fist and got cracked in the back of the head with the right hand and fell down. That's how funny this was. Yeah, especially if you turn up to the weigh-ins with Joker makeup on. What year is this? That was lame 6 months after the Dark Knight came out. But yeah, Dricus du Plessis, real guy, real power. Excited to have him in the division. Not the best start, but he wiped. People won't even think about how he was, a little bit. People won't even think about Perez giving him a bit of trouble because they'll just remember the knockout. Kind of like Ali's comeback when he fought Oscar Bonavena. He had an absolute shockingly bad fight, but he managed to knock Bonavena out in the last round with such a nice left hook that everyone was just like, wow, what an incredible knockout. Ali's back. Don't need to comment much more on that card, I don't think. Incredible knockouts, but really, the Sandhagen and Barbosa's performances really stood out to me the most. Oh, actually, I forgot to even mention in the Barbosa Amakani fight, I was so obsessed with that shift that I forgot to even talk about the grappling, which was really interesting, because Barbosa kept knocking him down and then looking for the anaconda choke, because obviously Amakani is quite famous for that. But you watched Amakani on the bottom, he was doing really interesting. He didn't seem too worried about the choke for the most part, but he kept wrapping elbows and trying to sit to his side and bundle Edson Barbosa over, so Barbosa would release the lock and start trying to work from more of a front headlock position. He tried to scoot through and do the sit out big nog style when you overhook the arm from the bottom of the sprawl, and then basically if Barbosa's hands came back in front of his head, he'd grab it with both hands and shuck it off and stand up. It was just a really nice example of how to work from the bottom. He got knocked down several times, and each time, that's the thing about Barbosa only putting the foot forward to catch himself and then immediately stepping back, which I really liked. It was showing that he knew he'd thrown himself out of position, do something defensively sound. Because we compare it to Joseph Benavidez, who I talk about shifting through necessity quite a lot. He throws his head forward and then he has to run in afterwards and he just keeps going. Whereas Barbosa was throwing himself forward in a conscious decision, catching himself on his right foot and then springing backwards immediately. And it meant that 3 times in this fight he dropped Amakani, but he was already moving backwards as Amakani was on the mat. So that was the downside. But you saw Amakani get to his hands and knees and he was slipping from hands and knees, which is always cool to see. Just good fight all round. So let's talk about some of these fights coming up this weekend. Ortega versus Chan Sung Jung. This one feels like it's been coming forever. Brian Ortega hasn't fought since the Max Holloway fight, which was an ass whooping. Chan Sung Jung, when did he last fight? Was that Frankie Edgar? Yeah, that was Edgar back in December. That feels like it was much longer ago. Well, actually, it's almost a year. Fuck. But his last 2 outings have been well, actually, the Edgar one went about 3 minutes, but they've been such short performances. He's just been knocking dudes out. He fought Yair Rodriguez just before that, did great work, but just got knocked out in the last seconds by engaging and getting elbowed over the back, which, who knew? Who knew that was a thing? But before that, Dennis Bermudez was his comeback fight after 4 years off, and he looked great in that one. Takedown defense on point. Boxing has always been great. Actually, hasn't always been great. He got much, much better. If you compare his boxing now to, say, back when he was fighting Jose Aldo, and even then, compare his boxing from the Mark Hominick fight to 3 fights earlier against Leonard Garcia, the guy has really come on in leaps and bounds. It's absolutely insane. He was a novelty act. He was this guy with good jiu-jitsu who just sort of waded forward, took all your punches, swung back spastically. And now he's genuinely one of the best strikers in the division. Incredible counterpuncher, great hitter, and he's got exciting jiu-jitsu on top of it, and good takedowns, and good takedown defense. That was one of the things that surprised me against Bermudez. He was really quite confident against a guy whose whole thing is wrestling. Now, the compelling point of this is that he's fighting Brian Ortega. Brian Ortega, decent hands, not bad. But his thing is jiu-jitsu, but he's got no takedowns. His takedowns have either, he's barely attempted them. He attempted a couple against Max Holloway, but for the most part, his takedowns have been garbage. He's been relying on hurting people on the feet. They duck in on his hips, and then he gets the front headlock. Or he gets a clinch and he'll throw his arm over their head because he's just taller than most of the dudes he fights. If you watch him against Cub Swanson, he's going from an over-under clinch. He locks his hands behind Swanson's back, and then he like yanks Swanson forward and throws his armpit over Swanson's head, which is like in catch wrestling and things like that. That's how they teach you not to go for a snap down. You don't reach over the guy's back because he can stand up straight and lift you instead of you pulling him down. But I mean, it's worked for him. What was the other one? Diego Brandao. He managed to like rice bail him over the top, mounted triangle from front headlock work. Brilliant stuff. The other thing about Ortega is that he's starting to use like the shoulder roll and stuff, which he's not amazing at. If you watched him compare his performance with the shoulder roll versus Holloway to Dustin Poirier's performance against Holloway, where Holloway was saying he's blocking weird between rounds because he's just very difficult to land clean blows on, whereas Holloway could just pick and choose like the holes in Ortega's guard. Ortega did do some nice little shoulder rolls to come back with elbows and things. Like we talked about that in Anderson Silva Advanced Striking 2.0. If you're a patron, go read that. But like in the Anderson Silva never knocked out another guy with the back elbow that he did against Tony Strickland, but he has now he started working it into his game as a countermeasure. So he comes off the shoulder roll with the back up elbow, which is gorgeous. And then Ortega also landed a spinning back elbow out of a shoulder roll sequence. So yeah, some really interesting ideas being brought forward by Brian Ortega. I'm just wondering like what he's got in this fight against Chan Sung Jung. Like he doesn't kick an awful lot, which I would think is a good idea against Chan Sung Jung. Chan Sung Jung stands long. He relies a lot on cross counters. So like he slips inside your jab and he wings his right hand over the top of your jab, and he's really good at knocking dudes out with that. Catches him coming back with like a straight arm left hook too. His punching form is strange, but he's got that timing. Who's that guy? Was it Wade Barrett? Someone. He was in Glory, but he had the weirdest, wingiest punching form. But he knew the length of his levers and he knew his timing, so he could always catch these guys with like overarm swings, but just perfectly timed over their punch. I mean, it didn't take him long to catch Moicano like off his first jab. And Moicano, great low kicker, should have been getting to that early and often. Why step into punching range with a guy who's got great counter punching? And has his lead leg out there because he is a counterpuncher. So yeah, very curious to see how this goes for Ortega, because I've seen him use a nice jab, like against Frankie Edgar. He was tripling it up and stuff. But I don't know how much of that was because he had scared Frankie Edgar off his hips. Frankie Edgar was standing up. He had a huge reach and height advantage on Frankie Edgar. What I always felt from that Frankie Edgar fight was that Ortega's striking was artificially made to look better than it is. However, he did surprise people like Cub Swanson on the feet. So I think Ortega's thing is that he's making a good faith effort to become a better boxer, and he is a very good hitter. I just think he isn't that good. I think the ceiling on his boxing ability isn't that high, or rather, he hasn't demonstrated like superb boxing technique and ability yet. I mean, I have revisiting fights like Chan Sung Jung versus Dustin Poirier, and then seeing what happened to both after that. I'm giving up being like, oh, this is that guy's ceiling, because you never know in this sport. But I feel like there was a lot of growth in Ortega that was sort of like overblown. I believe he is improving. I believe he was improving. I believe he was getting better at boxing and he was looking sharper. But I also think it was made to look better by the fact that Frankie Edgar was terrified of shooting a takedown. And a lot of Frankie Edgar's game is predicated on that, like being able to level change comfortably. The takedowns work into the striking works into the takedowns. You take one away and the other one suffers. It's not like he just, oh, well, I can't take you down, I'll just outstrike you then. He's never been that guy. He's always been like, oh, you're trying to stop my takedowns, I'm going to keep going up and down and try and wear you down, and then both will start working, hopefully. So quite a compelling fight there, I feel. Even before you get into Ortega slapping whatever his name was, can't remember his name, the translator / rapper / singer. But the rest of that card, I don't give a fuck about Caitlin Chikagian versus Jessica Andrade. I do like Jessica Andrade. It'd be interesting to see her at flyweight, but I find Caitlin Chikagian incredibly boring. She is one of those ki heavy fighters. But then you've got quite a few that are, we talked about this before, but like good names in odd matches. No, it's not actually as bad. Modestus Bucakis is pretty good, and we've seen him in the UFC before. The guy, what was it? Between rounds, we got the finish. But yeah, he's a fun guy. He's got a lot of finishes on his record, and he's fighting Jimmy Crute, who unapologetic fan of I am. Mr. Kimura. Not just that he has 2 Kimura submissions in the UFC, which is, I believe, the record, but he also, he uses the Kimura to turn people over. And the Kimura, it is an all-purpose thing. It is your means of standing up from the bottom. It is your means of, attacking from bottom half guard. It's a form of takedown defense. If you lock your hands on the Kimura, you can start taking the fight between the feet and the floor, and all sorts can happen in between there. You can use it for throws. So yeah, really fun. The problem with Jimmy Crute is that he did meet Misha Serkinov and have that crushing defeat in September. Got Peruvian necktied. He was going so well. He just taught Sam Alvey the benefits of communism by TKOing him. He had that great fight with Paul Craig. He rebounded with a win over Alexijuk, whose name I can never say, but that lad who KO'd John Vellante quickly. But Bucakis is a wild man, so that'll be fun. I kind of hope Jimmy Crute gets towards a title shot, because that division's so bad, and I actually consider him one of the exciting people in it. Claudio Silva is a low-key exciting guy. He's on, I think it's a 3-fight submission streak even. But Nordine Taleb, Danny Roberts and Cole Williams, not the cream of the crop guys, but back in 2014, before he had a long layoff, he got a split decision over Leon Edwards. So the guy is, it's a weird division. There's so many guys there, but this guy is a bit of a sleeper. In fact, that's a bit like, I bring him up every episode, but Leo Santos, you got that amazing win over a young prospect. You dropped out for a while. The young prospect went on to do better and better. So, the win over Kevin Lee for Leo Santos. And then you're just sort of stuck in the mid-card winning, but nobody really paying attention. But Claudio Silva's got a good one here, because he's got, he was supposed to fight Muslim Salikov, which would have been a banging fight. I love Muslim Salikov. Muslim Salikov's last one was actually a little bit boring compared to his usual fights, but I wanted to write something about Muslim Salikov for a while. But yeah, Salikov's out, and they replaced him with James Krause, who completely different fighter, but again, good hard fight. And also, I think probably, I feel like Muslim Salikov is kind of like a niche name. Guys know him, but James Krause is pretty established. Or maybe he's not. I've got a completely warped perception on this shit. And then low-key highlight of the card for me, Thomas Almeida back for the first time since not just 2018, January 2018. So it's been almost 3 years. That's insane. Suffered that really hard loss to Rob Font. He had a weird little run, because he was 20-0 undefeated, and I remember being so hyped for that fight with Cody Garbrandt. Cody Garbrandt literally just spazzed out at him. Just ran in, knocked him out. He fought Albert Morales and won after that in November of the same year. And then Jimmy Rivera decisioned him, and he got obliterated by Rob Font. And honestly, time off could have been cancellations and injuries, but obviously time off after a really bad knockout is always a good idea. I think it was Freddie Roach didn't let Manny Pacquiao even spar for the best part of a year after the Juan Manuel Marquez knockout. And his chin's looked really rock solid ever since. So, it's bro science, but that's all we've got, because you can't line people up in the lab and hit them in the head with a baseball bat and then, check the readings afterwards. And the other one that's probably of interest to you is that Matthias Gamrot is headlining the prelim portion of the card rather. So yeah, people were asking me the other week, how good's Matthias Gamrot as a grappler? Really, very good. It'd be very interesting to see how he goes in the UFC. And then the other one that's sticking out at me is weird is that Antigulov, whose first name I can never say, but the light heavyweight is on the card. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, and they've not even been hard fought. He lost in 1 round to Ion Cutelaba. He lost in under 50 seconds to Alexijuk, and then he lost in under 2.5 minutes to Paul Craig. What the fuck? That's the age of the UFC we're in. They're calling Betch Correia back to have a retirement fight in the UFC because there's no one to fucking fight. Anyway, let's do a couple of questions before we get out of here for this week. Slacky J, just a quick one. After last weekend's performance, who would win in this bantamweight triple threat match? Sparring Dillashaw, like against Barao, healthy Dom Cruz, or flow state Cory Sandhagen. Also, at what point do the lights go out and Peter Yan appears behind them with a steel chair? Your analysis is probably the only one qualified for this situation. P.S. MMA nerds go wacko for slacko. Thanks from Jesse in Newcastle. I love... it's kind of early to be putting Cory Sandhagen in with, the probably the two best bantamweights who have yet fought. But I do think he's a difficult matchup for Dom Cruz. I don't know if he's... Dillashaw... I'm falling back on the power thing again, but Dillashaw has a tremendous pace and great power, which is tricky to deal with. And he's so active, I don't see him like over swinging in answer to feints and things. Whereas Dom Cruz, I think Cory Sandhagen's, jabbing people back and low kicking or jabbing people back and body kicking. I think that's a real problem for Dom Cruz because, Henry Cejudo demonstrated it. When you move at Dom Cruz and he takes a full step back, you just step in again and kick the leg that's now in front. There's always going to be a leg leaving range last. And Cory Sandhagen, very good at putting pressure on people with feints. If you watch the fights where he was, until he met, like John Lineker, everyone he met, he could just back up and pick away at them. I think that'd be really hard for Cruz to deal with. I think the problem for Cruz would always be very good low kickers, or people who understand how to apply pressure and low kick, which is why I'd be really interested in the Aldo match, even though Aldo barely ever throws his low kicks anymore. But I think Aldo would recognize that is something that's really important against Dom Cruz. Fuck it, do it. There's nothing else going on in the bantamweight division while we're waiting for Yan and Sterling. Why not just have Dom Cruz fight Cory Sandhagen? Get Cory some money. Cheers, Jesse! Hi Jack, I'm starting work on a piece of fiction about martial arts weirdos in the vein of Frank Dukes, Count Dante, etc. I was wondering if you knew of any other historical or current martial arts scams, schemes and cons I should look into in the course of my research. Thanks, I will be listening with a croissant at the ready. From Eddie. You didn't mention him, so I'm going to bring him up, but like the OG, Ashida Kim, Mr. Ninjas. Back when ninjas were the thing, he was... just some karate dude, I think, who was like, yep, I know ninjutsu. Let me teach you. He released loads and loads of books like Mind Control or Dodging Bullets and shit like that. And it was just a dude in like a gi with balaclava on. It was very weird. But I think he's still around. He might still be teaching, because no matter how much you think like, oh, well, Yellow Bamboo's been exposed as a scam. Kyusho has been exposed as a scam. There are still people who will believe it. There are still people who want that to be a thing. And confirmation bias is a huge thing with stuff like that. If you're there and the guy does the chi knockout on you and you go down because you want it to be real, it's very easy to get indoctrinated in that shit. And I don't think you can't judge people too hard for it because, it's like religions. If they catch you at the right time, they'll get you in. But other examples Ashida Kim is a great one, but Rafael Torre was a really weird one. This is back in tap out sort of days, early UFC, but he was a journo covering the sport. He sort of talked himself into the way this sport worked back in the day, thinking about it now, is really weird because Joe Silva got his job as matchmaker by just turning up to lots of events and being like, make me your matchmaker. So it's kind of a weird thing to look back on, but Rafael Torre was I can't remember who he worked for as a website, but he was a dude who claimed he was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt and a street fighting legend. And then he carried on with it, and then he had an MMA fight, and it was very clear that he didn't know what he was doing. And people were, sort of unimpressed by that. And then he sort of disappeared for a bit, and then he committed a murder. And a very interesting character. But martial arts is full of weird dudes selling weird shit. I mean, the basic way to do it is if someone promises you something that seems too good to be true, probably is. It never changed. If someone tells you this is really hard, I've been doing it a long time, I still make tons of mistakes, but at least I'm better than when I started. Listen to that, yeah? Because I always remember, I think it was Tiki Donovan, who was the UK karate team coach for a while, but really UK karate legend, South African karate legend. But he said something that resonated with me years and years and years ago. He said, you don't want to learn things that will work in 5 minutes because then everyone can learn them. You want to learn things that take practice and take a long time to to do well with. On the other hand, the thing about things like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is that it doesn't take long to learn enough that you're just like, fucking hell, everyone is terrible in a fight if you clinch them and just topple them over. But, when you're talking about like actually getting good at martial arts, anyone who promises you that you'll be able to train killers and be the best very, very quickly, that's, or that their moves are just too dangerous, that's always a big tell. Yeah, shout out below if you know any other great ones like Frank Dukes, Ashita Kim, Count Dante. I mean, if you haven't, especially if you've not heard the story of Count Dante, that's one to look into. That's fucking incredible. That starts with some dude being a weird made-up martial arts master, and then graduates to him strapping dynamite to his rival's dojo. It's Cobra Kai as a tragedy. Anyway, I reckon that'll do us for this week. If you want to get in on the Patreon, read this week's breakdown of the stuff that happened at the weekend, and might as well announce it now. I'm working on Killing the King, Khabib Nurmagomedov. I'll make some of it available to everyone, and then I'll make most of it a Patreon thing to thank my supporters for being awesome. If you want to get in on that, sign up to the Patreon. If you want to send an email to the podcast, fightsgonebypodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I'm your boy Jack Slack, using the split between Marlon Moraes' abs as a dish. Bless.